Number 3, the time available between the eclipse and Passover, during which interval Herod dies. A number of scholars have pointed out that the numerous events recorded by Josephus in detail that took place between the eclipse and Herod's death, and from Herod's death to Passover, would require more time than was available between a March 13th 4 BC eclipse and Passover just 29 days later on April 11th. A number of scholars have endeavored to come up with minimal possible timelines for how fast everything recorded by Josephus could have been done. I'll mention 2, there are others. Martin suggested it is at least 54 days. Steinmann tried to be more generous to the Schurer hypothesis and said, let's allow that Josephus or his source embellished a few of the details. He came up with an absolute minimum. Can't go lower than 41 days. You need at least 41 days between the eclipse and Passover in order to fit everything recorded by Josephus. Because the March 13th of 4 BC eclipse occurs only 29 days before Passover, it is impossible to fit that eclipse with the chronology of Josephus. Steinmann also points out that if we say, well, what if the whole account was fabricated? Well, then that's as bad for the Schurer hypothesis as any other, because we need Josephus's data to do any of this math. So if Josephus just made it all up, or his source made it up, then we can't argue for any of these. We can't argue for the Schurer hypothesis at all. Allowing that Josephus preserved more or less what his source recorded, and that even if there's a little bit of embellishment, we need 41 days to cover everything, then any eclipse less than 41 days before the next Passover is out. That's going to take out the March of 5 BC eclipse, which wouldn't work with the Schurer calculations anyway, so it's out on 2 different counts. It also takes out the March of 4 BC eclipse. There's just not enough time. Now, some have said, in an effort to preserve the Schurer hypothesis, well, what about the September 5 BC eclipse? Could that be the one that Josephus is referring to? No, this doesn't work on 2 counts. First of all, as we'll discuss when we go into detail on Herod's sons and what they do after Herod's reign, they're very anxious to get to Rome to have Dad's will confirmed so that one of them can be made king, and they're competing with each other for who that's going to be. They don't go to Rome until after Passover. To suggest we're talking about the September of 5 BC eclipse and they don't go to Rome until 6 months later, which is 4-ish months since Herod died, this is inconceivable given the tremendous pressure they were under. I want to make sure Caesar confirms me. I want to make sure Caesar confirms me. A lot of really nasty family competition. This was a rough family. They're not going to wait that long. Furthermore, even if we threw that piece of evidence out, which I don't think we should, we have yet another problem. Because Josephus doesn't just tell us all of these things happened between the eclipse and Passover. He tells us some of them happened between the eclipse and Herod's death, and some of them happened between Herod's death and Passover. So even if this were the referenced eclipse, yeah, that leaves plenty of time for the stuff that happened between the eclipse and Herod's death. But Herod's death still has to be the 1st of Nisan or later. Thank you, Schurer hypothesis. And so the latter portion of Josephus's account, all of the things that happened between Herod's death and Passover still have to fit in the extraordinarily narrow range from the 1st of Nisan, which is required. Herod's reign must be reckoned from the 1st of Nisan for Schurer's math to work. You've got to fit all of these details between the 1st of Nisan and Passover on the 14th of Nisan. You've got 13 days. Steinmann estimated a minimum time of 21 to cover all the details recorded by Josephus. That's not everything from the eclipse to Passover. That's just the portion of those details that are Herod's death to Passover. He said minimum 21. Then he said, you know what, if we really, really tried to squeeze it, maybe we could fit it in 16 days. Not going to work in 13. So this eclipse is out too, not only because it is very inconsistent with the motivations of Herod's sons after his death, but you still can't fit the latter portion of Josephus's account, the stuff that happens between Herod's death and Passover, in the interval from the 1st of Nisan to the 14th. Another eclipse down. And by the way, it would be really odd to reference the September 5 BC eclipse in conjunction with Herod's death if he died 6 months later. This leaves us with 2 eclipses. We will spend additional time on them later. What we've shown, though, is these are the only 2 eclipses that can actually work with the other details provided by Josephus. And number 4, the Testimonies of Appian Dio Cassius. These are truly devastating to the Schurer hypothesis. Remember, Josephus is the source we're using to determine when Herod's reign began. 40 or 39, appointment by Rome. 37 or 36, the conquest of Jerusalem. But Josephus isn't our only source for this information. Appian, a major Roman historian, also tells us of Herod's appointment, and helpfully, he doesn't just say, this is the year, take my word for it. He gives us the context of what else was going on in Rome at the time. And so by looking at those other events, we can say Herod's appointment happens in conjunction with several other events. We know when some of these things happen, and we can say positively, Appian puts Herod's appointment by Rome in 39 BC. So we have possibility A supported by Josephus some of the time, and we have possibility B supported by Josephus some of the time and supported by Appian. We've got more. Dio Cassius, a heavyweight Roman historian, recounts for us the activities and campaigns of the Roman general Sosius and what was going on in this region of the world. It was Sosius who Rome sent to help Herod conquer Jerusalem. Dio Cassius, speaking of Sosius and that region, in 37 BC says nothing significant happened in that year. The conquest of Jerusalem, overthrowing the Hasmonean dynasty propped up by the Parthians and pushing them out, putting Jerusalem and Judea firmly under Roman control. This was not nothing of significance. This was a big deal. And so Dio Cassius is firmly telling us the conquest of Jerusalem did not happen in 37 BC. So if our two options are 37 and 36, clearly Dio Cassius has ruled out 37. It must be 36. Let's also consider the reference to Pompey. Josephus told us that Herod conquered Jerusalem 27 years after Pompey conquered Jerusalem. The obvious meaning of this passage is that 27 years have elapsed. We mentioned the tenure of the high priest, that added up to 27 years, rather than trying to do somersaults around the obvious meaning of Josephus and say, by 27 he means 26. If we allow the Pompey statement to stand on its own, Josephus favors possibility B through that reference as well. So here we have an interesting problem. Either Josephus, who we know is wrong at least some of the time, is the only one who got it right and everybody else is wrong, or major historians like Appian and Dio Cassius did in fact know what they were talking about, and Josephus, who we know got it wrong at least some of the time, is the one who's confused. The more straightforward solution is obvious. How does the Schurer hypothesis handle this? What did Schurer do with the evidence of Appian and Dio Cassius? He unceremoniously threw it under the bus, couldn't make it fit with the theory, wanted to save the favorite date, and so said, yep, we're just going to set this aside, pay no attention to the historians behind the curtain. How does the Schurer hypothesis handle this today? What do we do about the conflicting testimony of Appian and Dio Cassius? They ignore it. We can't make it work with the favorite theory, we can't save the favorite date, we're just going to sweep it under the rug. This is historically straightforward. You've got one historian on his own who can't keep his facts straight versus the testimony of Appian and Dio Cassius, who are internally consistent, and Josephus, who's right some of the time. This means inclusive reckoning is out. This doesn't resolve the question about Nisan or Tishri. Turns out we don't have to answer that one. This gives us plenty of time between the eclipse and Passover. In either case, there's more than 2 months, enough time for everything Josephus recorded without going overboard and allowing for a full 6 months. And we don't have to throw under the bus the testimonies of Appian and Dio Cassius, who give us solid information about major Roman figures that we can reliably date to confirm that Herod was appointed by the Romans in 39 BC and conquered Jerusalem in 36.